other artificially derived cannabinoids. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to attend this afternoon's meeting. My name is Anthony Galtoski, and I'm a policy analyst for the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Today's meeting is being recorded. Please be aware of whether or not your phone or computer is muted. Amanda Borup, OLCC policy analyst, will be the tech support today in muting all to keep the noise down. This means she will mute all periodically to make sure there isn't competing noise. Please don't take this personally. Work group members are asked to remain on mute until the introductions portion of the meeting. I will be the timekeeper. We have a lot to get through today, so I may have to cut off conversations to be sure we get to other issues. I will try to give everyone a 5-minute warning. Only invited advisory committee members will be a part of today's conversation. Members were selected due to their level of interest or position within the community. If you are not an invited member or proxy, please use the call-in number that was transmitted in the notice for this work group meeting. With that in mind, I ask that each of you serve as goodwill ambassadors to the discussion so that you may represent your constituency professionally. Non-committee members will be able to tender comments during either the public hearings or during the comment periods, which will be held for the different rule packages in which these concepts and issues will appear. Committee members, please state your first and last name when you make a comment. Okay, let's get started. Today is Thursday, September 30th, 2021 at approximately 2 p.m. The OLCC is undertaking an effort to draft and amend rules relating to legislative changes and emerging products. The OLCC has compiled this committee to discuss issues relating to Delta-8 and artificially derived cannabinoids. Most of you are familiar with the rulemaking process, but for those of you who have not yet had the opportunity, or for those of you listening in, I will begin by saying a few words about rulemaking and the purpose of advisory committee meetings. The purpose of having all of the members on this committee today is to hear from different parts of the industry and our public health and safety partners. As such, this committee is comprised of licensees, permittees, industry representatives, OLCC staff, members of law enforcement, local government, the public, local community organizations, small businesses, and other interested stakeholders. The Commission strives to hear from all interested parties. Our role today will be to explain the background and context of these rules and the changes that are being proposed in this package. We will provide facilitation to ensure that all committee members can provide input today. During this afternoon's meeting, we will seek your input on changes related to Delta-8 and other artificially derived cannabinoids. The rules that we are discussing at today's committee meeting will be included in a larger bill and technical package. However, due to the nature and complexity of this topic, we are holding an advisory committee just for this topic. Under Oregon's public meeting law, this meeting is open to the public, and members of the public are free to observe our discussion but may not offer comments. The agency will digitally record this work group meeting and will produce and circulate a record of our discussion. However, because this meeting is intended to promote the open exchange of ideas, we will maintain an informal atmosphere, and meeting minutes will record only the topics discussed and the main points being made. Approximately 1 week after our meeting, we will post and distribute the meeting's audio. As part of this meeting, the OLCC seeks to understand the fiscal impact of these rules. At the end of today's meeting, we will briefly discuss the fiscal impact of these rules. We understand that there is a lot of discussion about these topics, so before we dive into the concept, does anyone have any procedural questions? Not seeing any questions, we will now move on to introductions. I will be calling on you to introduce yourself, and I'm basically going to go top to bottom in the chat thread of who is on this call. When introducing yourself, please state your name and the organization you are representing in your affiliation with the industry. Up first is Brad Douglas.
Thank you, Anthony. Brad Douglas here. I'm a chemist by training. Professionally, I've been involved with FDA regulatory affairs, and I'm representing the workshop today.
Thank you, Brad. Up next is Courtney Moran.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having this meeting today. I'm Courtney Moran. I am the president and lobbyist for the Oregon Industrial Hemp Farmers Association.
Thank you, Courtney. David Standiford.
Hello, I'm David Standiford. I'm the laboratory and compliance technician with the OLCC.
Thank you, David. Dylan Summers.
My name is Dylan Summers. I'm here on behalf of Bonnie Jo Peterson as a proxy, who is here on behalf of the Association of Western Hemp Professionals and the Industrial Hemp Association of Washington.
Thanks, Dylan. Eric Wendt.
Thanks for having me, Eric Wendt. I'm the Chief Science Officer with Greenleaf Lab here in Portland, Oregon.
Thanks, Eric. Jason Hansen.
Good afternoon, everybody. Jason Hansen, Director of Compliance, OLCC.
Thanks, Jason. Now we have another Jason Lampman.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Lampman, owner, operator of a micro-tier OLCC licensed farm and also a small hemp acreage.
Thanks, Jason. Joe Bergen.
Hi there, I'm Joe Bergen. I'm the general manager of Avitas Oregon. I represent the Avitas Elevated and Better brands here in Oregon. Nice to see you all.
Thanks, Joe. Next up, we have John Thompson.
Hi, John Thompson here. I go by JT, though I think everybody knows me as that. I'm the owner-operator of Sublime Solutions, and we hold both processing and distribution licenses.
Thanks, JT. Kelly Rout.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kelly Rout, Director of the Administrative Hearings Division, OLCC.
Thanks, Kelly. Up next, Kim London.
Hello, everyone. Kim London. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Cannabis Association.
Thanks, Kim. And another Kim Stuck.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kim Stuck. I'm the CEO of Olay Consulting, a cannabis and hemp compliance consulting firm that deals with food safety, FDA regulations, GMP, things like that.
Thank you, Kim. And next we have Margaret Flershinger.
Hi, Margaret Flershinger, Oregon Health Authority Medical Marijuana Program under Policy Analyst.
Thank you, Margaret. And Nathan Ricks.
Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Ricks, Deputy Director for OLCC for Policy and Strategy. Good to see you all.
Thank you, Nathan. Nicholas Pullman.
Hi, Nick Pullman, Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board chemist.
Thank you for joining us, Nick. And Stephen Crowley.
Hi, Stephen Crowley, Hemp and Processing Specialist at OLCC.
Thanks, Stephen. And Sunny Summers.
Good afternoon, Sunny Summers with the Oregon Department of Agriculture.
Thanks, Sunny. TJ Sheehy. TJ may be having audio issues. TJ is the Director of Research and Analytics for the OLCC. If TJ comes back, we'll get to you, but otherwise, we'll move on to Travis Ruthenberg.
Hello, Travis Ruthenberg, SC Laboratories.
Thanks, Travis. And last on the list is Tyler Bechtel.
Hi there, I'm Sergeant Tyler Bechtel. Sorry, I've got a little lag. I'm with the Oregon State Police.
Thanks, Tyler. Okay, we're almost ready to move on. I just have one quick housekeeping note. We won't be sharing the rules on our screen. Amanda has posted a link in the chat to the draft rule language, and you should have all received the draft rule language as a PDF in the email that we sent you. For those of you that are listening in, you can find the draft rule language on the OLCC's Cannabis website under the Public Meetings tab, and then you navigate to Rule Hearings and Advisory Committee Meetings. And now I'm going to turn it over to Stephen Crowley, who will provide a background on this rule package. Stephen?
Thanks, Anthony. So today we're going to be going over the portions of our draft rules that relate to artificially derived cannabinoids. This is one of 3 rule advisory committees we have scheduled for this round of rulemaking. Next week, another advisory committee will discuss most of the other bill and technical updates we're working on. Then later in October, a 3rd committee will discuss reclassifying violations of OLCC rules. Some of the rules that we're going through today also include proposed changes that are not related to artificially derived cannabinoids. Those changes will be discussed by the Rule Advisory Committee that meets next Tuesday. But as long as we have time today, we can also hear some feedback on those changes. Quick note on the scope of what we're talking about today. Artificially derived cannabinoids is a term that was given specific meaning in House Bill 3000. It refers to substances that are made by taking a cannabis starting material and putting it through a chemical reaction. It doesn't mean fully synthetic cannabinoids or cannabinoids that are made from anything other than a cannabis starting material. Generally, those sorts of substances fall under regulation by the Oregon Board of Pharmacy. I also want to acknowledge up front that these draft rules represent something of a shift in thinking from how we've been trying to approach this topic. We have been trying to figure out a framework that left some sort of path open for artificially derived cannabinoids. As we continue to hear feedback on the issue, including from a work group we held last month, as well as recent statements by the FDA and CDC, it's become clear that the science just isn't there to be able to have rules that make sure this can be done in a way that doesn't pose a lot of unknown risks to consumers. At this point, it's still not clear whether any Delta-8-THC manufacturer has actually confirmed which stereoisomer of Delta-8-THC is generated by the CBD conversion process, or exhaustively identified reaction byproducts from their production method and ways to remove or mitigate those byproducts so that the entire composition of the isolated product is known before packaging it for sale to consumers. We are always open to receiving new information and new data, and with new information, we can always revisit these issues in the future. But considering the information that's available right now, these draft rules are written to prohibit OLCC processors from making artificially derived cannabinoids and to prohibit the inclusion of artificially derived cannabinoids in any cannabis product sold to Oregon consumers. So having said all that, I'd like to open it for general comments and feedback on that overall approach before we dive into the specifics of the draft rule language.
Yeah, just some, JT from Sublime Solutions here. Just some background and totally understand, Stephen, the comments that were just made and we discussed a little bit last week. Caution, I think, is the right approach. That said, and I didn't have time to do a real deep dive on it, but here at Sublime, we had a brilliant pharmaceutical chemist that was a consultant from the workshop a few years ago. And he came up with a very elegant process to create D8 from high THC Delta-9 distillate. And when I had a chance today to quickly look at some of that data, the results that we have, which is in comparison as a contrast to the hemp-derived versions of Delta-8, that in distillate that was close to 90% Delta-9, we were able to achieve an 80 to 85% conversion of that to Delta-8. And then when you add the Delta-8 purity to the remaining Delta-9, plus the other minor cannabinoids that are generally in these oils, we were creating roughly 95% total cannabinoids with, that little bit on top which is standard in most THC oils. You're not going to get to 100%. But the point being, if a process can achieve these levels of purity, and as suggested by Stephen, if we assayed for any, residual catalyst material and or expected byproducts that might be dangerous from that, I would think that if not now, in the future, based on research like this that actually looks at the stereoisomer that's created and potential problematic byproducts with something that is of this high level of purity, and coming from what's a marketable THC oil to begin with, as opposed to a CBD conversion, that I think the agencies should keep that open and that we should keep the conversation going, because it seems clear that the national consumers are interested now that they know about D8, and we've heard cases where people that stay away from D9 are happy to find D8 because of some of the differences in characteristics of the experience. So just wanted to put that on the table up front.
Thanks, JT.
Hi, everyone. This is Courtney Moran, Oregon Industrial Hemp Farmers Association. Stephen, I very much appreciate you providing that preface. When I was reviewing these rules with my members, and we saw these basically blanket prohibitions or, a blanket ban in both in regards to products being sold or processed by OLCC licensees and sold in the OLCC licensed retail market, as well as an outright ban in regards to what hemp handlers in the hemp industry can do in the general market. We're concerned because that is, like you said, that was not the intent of what we had discussed during the 2021 legislative session. That is not what House Bill 3000 provides for. What House Bill 3000 provides for is setting up a true regulatory framework. And I know that, yes, the industry is split, both the hemp industry, both the, cannabis marijuana industry in regards to these products, but there are a lot of folks that are making these products out there. And Oregon historically has been and still is a leader in developing policy for cannabis, whether it is hemp or it's marijuana. And I feel that we do have a unique opportunity here to actually set up a regulatory framework and not just put, an outright ban on these products, which is what we've seen happen in other states that don't have the type of expertise that we see here within this advisory committee, within the other advisory committees that are put together, both with the Department of Agriculture and OLCC. The bans that we've seen are often in states that don't have adult use cannabis program or medical marijuana programs, where they don't understand the science and they don't know how to regulate these types of products. Whereas in Oregon, I think we do know how to regulate these products, and that we work really hard to continue to develop our programs and really find robust ways to provide opportunities for industry, but also to make sure that the products are safe for consumers. So I do very much appreciate and acknowledge the notices that have come out by FDA and by CDC in the last week and a half, and appreciate what the content of what those notices contained. With CDC did have specific recommendations for retailers within their notice that came out. And if we look at the FDA notice, I just, side comment, they say these products are not approved by FDA. Well, neither is CBD, right? But these products are all over the market, and we're figuring out ways to regulate those products and create parameters so that these products are safe. And so what we would like to see is a continued conversation about these products, not an outright ban, but looking to, what are reasonable concentration limits or milligram limits per products? What testing would be required to provide safety for these products? What labeling requirements could be put in place so that consumers are actually informed on what these products are, and would not be leading to mislabeling. So I do hope that the agency does continue to have an open dialogue with the industry, and that we do get to a point where we are setting up a regulatory framework and not an outright ban. And along with that, and Brad sent a email to the group, I don't know, like 45 minutes ago or something, before the meeting started, about concerns about the definition for artificially derived cannabinoids. And OIHFA and the hemp industry also have very similar concerns with the way that the definition for artificially derived cannabinoids has been expanded beyond House Bill 3000. And so I don't know if this is the time to start getting into that definition and the broader implications that we're concerned that it has, or if you want to go section by section or how, but I do think that that definition for artificially derived cannabinoids, we really need to address, because that has implications for the rest of these rules. And our concerns that I'm talking about now, these aren't about Delta-8, Delta-10, what have you. These are about, non-intoxicating minor cannabinoids that have on their face, the way this is drafted, look like they're being roped into these regulations that we are not okay with.
Thanks, Courtney. And I think we'll get into the specifics of the definition. It's one of the first rules here, but I think if there's any other comments on the general approach, let's tackle that first.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Kim Stuck. I'm with LA Consulting. So I actually come from the public health regulatory side of cannabis. I was actually the first cannabis regulator for Public Health Authority back in 2014 in Denver, Colorado, when it became adult use regulated, THC was. And so I think that, the thing that we have to take in consideration, I mean, exactly what Courtney said, it's intoxicating versus non-intoxicating, right? CBD doesn't, a kid can ingest a CBD candy bar and not much will happen to them. But if they get a hold of a Delta-8 or a THCO candy bar, that's when people start to get concerned. And I think that making that assumption and understanding that, certain cannabinoids have a little more of a triggering and aspect to the consumers and that kind of thing, we have to take that into consideration. And kind of where does it end? With the cannabis plant, there's so many cannabinoids and so many things that chemists can do nowadays with all of those different cannabinoids that we're potentially talking about thousands of different substances in the next 10 to 20 years that, we're going to have to take into effect. Are we going to ban each and every one of them as they come out and become popular? I think that writing regulations, which I've done many times, taking a blanket statement doesn't always work, but doing each individual thing costs more work for regulators than is needed. And, saying something, and this is just, an example, but saying something, to the point of intoxicating cannabinoids that are derived from these plants, need to be regulated in this way. And I believe that all cannabinoids should be tested to the standards that THC is tested to. And I think that all of the intoxicating products that are being made, probably need warning signs on the packaging and most likely need to be sold out of a dispensary or something to that degree. Obviously, there's probably many, many things that I am leaving out, but I mean, just taking those kinds of things into consideration, I totally agree with John that I think that there's a place for all of these derived cannabinoids. I think that they can help a whole lot of people. It's just a matter of making sure that we're regulating them in a way that won't make people more biased against the cannabis industry and these products. So regulating them enough that they are safe and there's no major issues, recalls or people getting sick or disposals and things like that. It would really, really be great for the entire industry as a whole.
This is TJ with OLCC. Can you all hear me? Yes, okay. Sorry, I cut out right at the intros when Anthony said now TJ's turn, so I apologize for that. I'm TJ Sheehy, Director of Analytics and Research with the OLCC. So just a couple of comments to Courtney and Kim, what you're talking about. As Stephen said, we wrestled with this, right? And it's different than the approach we had originally intended prior to the work group. But I will say what makes us particularly nervous in light of the work group conversation we had is it's one thing to talk about labeling and those sorts of things in terms of intoxication. It's entirely different to talk about it in terms of things that can actively harm a consumer. And as Stephen said before, as far as we know, there's no manufacturer of this who has been able to show, number one, high level of purity like 95, 99% plus, but even beyond that, for those unknowns, hasn't really been able to pinpoint what those byproducts are. And so even taking what we had originally thought of as sort of at least narrow the black box to something like 5% or 1% of what those byproducts are, in light of the work group conversation where there are actual byproducts that even at low concentrations of 1% or less can actively harm consumers, that is what is causing a great amount of unease for us in the track we had been on. So all that to say, this discussion is obviously part of the framework development, but if we are going to go down the road of allowing Delta-8 or other artificially derived cannabinoids, then the active harm that could be caused by even small concentrations of unknown byproducts, we're not comfortable with a laissez-faire approach of test to 95% purity and call it good. There needs to be something that actively mitigates, takes into account, and protects consumers from byproducts that could cause active harm.
Any other comments before we hop into the language and the rules here? All right, so starting at the top, changes and definitions. The first change here, just adding adult use cannabinoid in Division 25 is more of a bill and technical piece. It's not particularly related. The second definition here, and this is the one that Courtney flagged for discussion, artificially derived cannabinoid, and this is largely the language from statute with just some clarification about what is encompassed by that created by a chemical reaction that changes the molecular structure language. So, I mean, that includes exposing marijuana or hemp items to chemical reagents, catalysts, reactants, or other reactive materials under conditions that cause a reaction that changes the molecular structure of a cannabinoid, or a cannabinoid manufactured by processing a marijuana item or hemp item through column chromatography using reactive materials such as bleaching clay, which results in a reaction that changes the molecular structure of a cannabinoid. And then clarifies in terms of what it does not include. It doesn't include just extraction or making an extract or concentrate. Doesn't include decarboxylation without a chemical catalyst. And then adding in that cannabinoids, that it does not include cannabinoids that occur naturally in cannabis, manufactured from a chemical substance derived from cannabis by mimicking or accelerating natural degradation processes using heat, light, pressure, and air. So opening it up for discussion on that definition.
I'll jump in and then hopefully a chemist will be jumping in after me. So I do want to just go very quickly back to the adult use cannabinoid definition. I know this definition comes directly out of House Bill 3000. My folks just asked that we have on the record that when we're talking about adult use cannabinoids, that the limits for Delta-9 are reasonable for general hemp products, because hemp products do contain trace amounts of Delta-9. And so we just want to put that on the record. Okay, so artificially derived. So this definition, and you briefly mentioned this earlier, Stephen, was that, we see this proposed definition as creating a delineation for artificially derived as including anything that's produced with a chemical reaction, chemical reagent, versus something that's naturally occurring or extracted or decarboxylated. And in this initial discussion that we just had, Delta-8 was mentioned several times. And, you know, that was really kind of the intent during our negotiations on House Bill 3000 to include Delta-8 and other, you know, tetrahydrocannabinols within this artificially derived definition. But the way that it's been expanded here in these rules or proposed rules, my folks have concerns specifically about CBD isolate, CBN, CBC, CBG, their isolates, and THC-free material. You know, these products have been on the market, they're compliant, they're safe, they're, you know, more so naturally occurring cannabinoids, they're meeting the THC limitations. And we understand the goal here is to delineate hemp from high THC and from intoxicating cannabinoids. And so we want to make sure that the definition of artificially derived is really creating that delineation of THC derivatives from minor cannabinoids. And if we look back to that definition of adult use cannabinoid, right, what we're really trying to get at here is intoxicating. And that's what that adult use cannabinoid definition includes, is an artificially derived cannabinoid that is reasonably determined to have an intoxicating effect. But this proposed definition of artificially derived goes beyond that scope. And so we want to understand, what is the intent from OLCC? Are you trying to include CBN, CBC, different isolates, THC-free material? Because we need that clarification, and we hope that the answer is no.
So I guess just to lay out my understanding of the language in House Bill 3000, the adult use cannabinoid, that piece speaks to the intoxicating part and includes artificially derived cannabinoids that are reasonably determined to have an intoxicating effect. Artificially derived cannabinoid, as a general term, you know, is exactly what it says: a chemical substance that's created by a chemical reaction that changes the molecular structure of a chemical substance derived from cannabis. So, I mean, to the extent that a product is being manufactured by, you know, synthetic chemistry on an extract, as opposed to just, you know, extraction and, you know, for lack of a better word, ordinary kitchen processes like heating. You know, if chemical reagents are being added to transform the molecular structure, I mean, that's what that seems to describe. So, I mean, it depends on the specific product. You know, an isolate that's made by, you know, crystallizing it out of a extract, you know, that's obviously still just an isolated, naturally occurring material. But if you're taking a extract and transforming the chemicals within it into other, you know, into other substances, that's, you know, that falls into artificially derived cannabinoid, and to, you know, what TJ was speaking to the extent that the byproducts of whatever reaction is being driven there, if those byproducts, you know, have not been characterized, I think it seems premature to say that these products are safe if it's not clear what's in them.
This is Anthony Geltowski. Just as a quick reminder, please state your name for the record. Thank you. JT?
Hi, this is JT from Sublime Solutions. I want to echo a bit of what Courtney said. We supply a number of the edible companies, and I think some qualification, particularly in the prohibitions, because the way, and it's further down in the rule, that you cannot manufacture them or create products with them. And if that's not qualified by adult use, artificially derived adult use cannabinoids, then you're saying, even, you know, in the OLCT market, to say somebody like Wild, they have a very successful line that's incorporating, you know, high purity CBG that's coming from hemp. And, you know, there's going to be a huge impact. And I understand that, you know, intoxicating or not intoxicating, there's these issues of purity and so forth and the unknowns. But again, at least with something like CBG or CBN, it is being deployed in the marketplace, and as with when we went over ingredients last year, in the dearth of data or a requirement that you prove that there's not potentially dangerous byproducts or residues or impurities, then we've got at least some level of track record that says these non-intoxicating novel cannabinoids, when they're purified properly, they actually impart great benefits as opposed to any potential negative things. So what I hear Courtney saying is there could be massive dislocation, especially on the non-intoxicating, not, and therefore not adult use cannabinoids. And I think we can get a little bit more sophisticated even in this round by setting some boundaries around the use of non-intoxicating artificially derived compounds like CBD and CBG and stuff like that. Well, CBD is mostly just an isolate and crash it out. So that one doesn't really, but CBN, as Brad put out in his email, which we might get to talk about a little bit here in a minute, about CBN, it is naturally occurring, but that's not how it's being created so that it can be used as an ingredient, en masse, so to speak. So yeah, I'm agreeing with Courtney. We really need to look at this maybe with a little bit more sophistication.
Go ahead, Jonathan. Oh, you're muted.
Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, you are still muted. Still muted. Jonathan, you're still muted, and why don't we move along if somebody else wants to chime in on this particular topic, and we can see if we can get back to you, Jonathan. Sorry.
He sent a note that it says that the organizer has him muted, so maybe somebody running the meeting can try to unmute him.
This is Amanda. I'm not able to unmute him. I've tried. I made it so he shows that he's not muted on my side, but he's still showing muted on his side.
Eric went Greenleaf Lab. If I just chime in for a quick second while Jonathan figures out his audio. I'm curious about the section in there that intoxicating effects. Is that going to be a thing that's defined, or who's determining whether intoxicating, what is intoxicating and who is getting intoxicated, I guess, or how it's intoxicating? And then with regard to the CBN, would it be up to the laboratory to determine whether the CBN was derived via chemical process or extracted from minor cannabinoids? Because we see 99% plus isolates, whether that's CBN, CBG, CBD, et cetera, at least to like on a cannabinoid profile in an assay, it's not telling you, like there's not a, like that test in itself is not telling you the method of production. And so, at least at the level currently, as things are happening, like that wouldn't be something we could determine using standard methodology.
Eric, would you mind just stating your name real quick for the record? Thanks.
Eric went Greenleaf Lab. Sorry about that.
I could chime in here. Dylan Summers on behalf of Bunny Joe Peterson. I just wanted to throw my support behind Eric's comment. Tremendously difficult to identify what, the source of the cannabinoid in the end product or in the extract itself. And then I just wanted to also throw support behind the idea that the priority here is to get at those impurities in the extracts and all the processes regarding artificial or synthetic cannabinoids that that we just do maintain a focus on those impurities from the processes and not necessarily the cannabinoids themselves.
Yeah, I agree with that statement as well. If we can prove that the actual cannabinoid is pure and there isn't any residual solvents or other chemicals that are harmful to people, then that, makes a lot of these products a lot safer for the public.
Jim, would you mind just stating your name for the record? And sorry to sound like a broken record here. Just please introduce yourself. Thank you.
You're so sorry. I'm sorry, I forgot. Kim Stuck with Lay Consulting.
I want to follow up on that because I think it's a JT from Sublime Solution. That's really important. And the idea of control studies coming from the pharma industry, this is exactly why they have them in place. So that if you can establish a process that is known and documented and that shows that there are no adulterants or byproduct impurities that are dangerous, because let's face it, on the pharma side, it could be, micrograms of something that could be quite dangerous. And so if we look at that principle, that's another way potentially to begin to craft regulations that actually make control studies a lot more useful, because you're looking at those potential impurities and being able to decide based on best data and knowledge whether this process and this processor who's doing this passes muster, basically, and then is able to take that out to market.
And this is Courtney Moran, Oregon Industrial Hemp Farmers Association. I'll echo those several comments that were just made. Our folks would also like to see that OLCC puts in place a SOP or some clear standards for determining or testing, for these impurities, for intoxication, that would delineate out these adult use cannabinoids, like truly artificially derived cannabinoids, especially as new cannabinoids are going to be discovered and understood, as Kim was explaining earlier.
Stephen Crowley, OLCC. So, just to clarify, OLCC does not have a laboratory or research capacity. So, that is kind of what we have asked about in the previous work group, and are absolutely still open to more feedback on, is the extent to which industry has done this kind of work to trace down what is coming out of the processes. That's something that we absolutely are interested in hearing more about. Just in the absence of that information being readily available or forthcoming, that's sort of how we've landed here, where the unknown nature of the byproducts is really a significant concern, and we haven't heard suggestions on an approach that would alleviate that concern. But we, again, are absolutely open to more information, more data.
Anthony Geltosky. Jonathan, I just want to quickly say we see your message in the chat, and we're taking a look at it. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Kim Stuck with the Lay Consulting again. And I think Stephen, exactly what you're talking about is what many different states are struggling with as well, and why many states have decided to just outright ban Delta-8 and Delta-10, because they don't understand the chemical breakdown of everything, and I certainly don't either. Maybe there are some chemists that could break it down a little better, but when you're testing for residual solvents and those kinds of things, it seems that each different cannabinoid that's created, they use different solvents for, and then you put it through a heat step or something like that. That's another chemical reaction that causes other byproducts. And until we really can understand, each chemical reaction, what the byproducts are, what residual solvents we need to test for, it is going to be very, very difficult to write regulations that can state that these products are safe or unsafe. Like I said, I think that they should be going through some kind of testing standard, but adding all of this to specific regulations is going to be really difficult because of that.
Thanks, Kim. Steve Crowley, OLCC. Just wanted to read Jonathan's comment into the record for the audio recording here. Jonathan wrote, I'd like to continue on the topic of isolated or pure products being beneficial. We should not be afraid of these chemical processes, but should definitely be afraid of the possible residuals from the processes. A lot of the distillate on the current OLCC market has 5 to 15% unknown cannabinoids. Depending on the distillation process to make the distillate, the 5 to 15% could be just as dangerous as the residuals from synthetic cannabinoids. Using heat to decrease THC and increase THC can produce isomerizations, depending on what temp you get up to, that we still do not have testing standards in place to identify. In conclusion, we should push for a move toward purity and knowing what's in our products. Thank you, Jonathan. All right, and if there are no other comments on that, we can continue on. Let's see, so the next change here, there's a change in the definition of common ownership on page 4. That's related to implementing Senate Bill 408 and the producer transfer privileges. So that is something we'll discuss next week. Changing Oregon liquor control to Oregon liquor and cannabis on page 5. Toward the bottom of page 5, we just have some definitions of Delta-8-THC, Delta-9-THC, and Delta-9-THCA, just to have those terms be more clear and explicit by using the IUPAC nomenclature there. I don't think there are any huge implications for artificially derived cannabinoids, but I'll pause for a moment if anyone has comments.
JT from Sublime here, and I hate to jump back up to where we were, but real quick, I think in the email that Brad sent around, the note, which I thought about last week too, is there's no indication about biosynthetically produced cannabinoids, and although they're not present in large amounts in the industry, there are a known number of groups that have moved and possibly patented techniques. And now you get, this is not a chemical thing, it's not an extractive thing by chemical means or mechanical means, and yet it's going to start happening. And I'm wondering if the agency wouldn't consider looking at that, and at least at this point, with the understanding and forward-lookingness that those should be put in one of these areas, and again, and possibly also being under a regulation about purity, proof of purity, and getting ingredients approved. So just wanted to point that out because it's up and coming, and it's going to be the way my sense is when it goes on a mass scale, if I can put yeast and sugar with the right genetics into a vat and do it en masse, well, that could trump eventually what's coming out of the field that's used for these types of concentrates and extracts. Thank you.
Thanks, JP. Steve Crowley, OLCC. So just to be clear, OLCC's authority is around cannabis, mostly marijuana, hemp in certain contexts, but we don't have regulatory authority over biosynthetic production with genetically modified yeast or any of those sorts of methods. That would, my understanding is that currently just falls under regulation by Oregon's Board of Pharmacy. But if if there were a push to include yeast, cannabinoids made from yeast into the OLCC system, I think that would take a statutory change. I don't think it's anything that's within the scope of what we could look at right now.
JT, here. Thanks for the clarification, Stephen. That makes sense.
Let's see, moving on in the definitions. So toward the bottom of page 7, just a change from registered to licensed on the hemp growers and handlers. Part of House Bill 3000 is changing those hemp certificates from ODA from registrations to licenses. Page 8, industrial hemp, the definition is just revised to refer to statute, and statute gives Department of Agriculture the authority basically to put parameters around what that means. So just making the change here to make sure that it's clear that industrial hemp in our rules means what it says in statute, which in turn means the definitions that Department of Agriculture adopts. Industrial hemp derived vapor item, so that's for implementing Senate Bill 96, which is related to additives in vapor items. So that'll be another topic for next week. Same with inhalant delivery system. Jumping down to page 11, the definition of processes is updated. This just matches the definition of House Bill 3000. And just to be clear, this is a change to make clear that when the word process is used in ORS 475B or within OLCC rules, it includes a OLCC licensed marijuana processor processing hemp or hemp commodities or products. It's really just a minor language cleanup piece. It doesn't bring hemp processing outside of the OLCC regulated system in any way under our rules. Page 13, total Delta-8-THC is defined just more explicitly, another minor update for clarity. And that brings us to the end of definition. So I'll pause again, and if anybody has any feedback on definitions here.
Yeah, JT from Sublime again. One of the things that it has come up in a couple of conversations, both with OLCC side and OHA side, and I still don't see any clarity. So Delta-8, we now know, is intoxicating, and it does naturally occur. And so THC max on a label. Now we're going to have to test for Delta-8 just to see if it's there. There's labeling issues. Are we going to have to put it on there? And we'll get to that later. But just in terms of the calculation, as we move forward and say there are more intoxicating adult use cannabinoids found, it seems reasonable to me that you would have to include those in the THC max. And I say this because a few years ago we were prototyping D9 with some D8 with some CBD, and I believe I talked with Stephen, with you about it, and said, it's only Delta-9 that we can stop at 1,000. Could I put 1,500 of Delta-8? I mean, it causes a significant problem. Now, at this point, basically banning Delta-8 in any sizable quantities, it might not be an issue at this point. But what if somebody found a strain, like you can find strains with higher levels of THCV, which is intoxicating? And I would think, to be completely transparent with the consumer, that this would need to be included in THC max, even if it didn't have to be specifically called out or it was optional in terms of the labeling for the brand. But just a consideration there as we move forward.
Stephen Crowley, OLCC, thanks for that, JT. And yeah, that is something that we have given some thought to. Kind of the way that House Bill 3000 was set up, it really just tackles the artificially derived cannabinoids for right now. The broader issue of other intoxicating substances naturally occurring in cannabis is an issue that was kind of pushed off to the task force that was established by House Bill 3000. So I imagine that task force will be considering issues of naturally occurring Delta-8-THC levels, THCP, THCV, those kinds of concerns. It is definitely something to think about, but I think a little bit outside of our scope for rulemaking this year.
I have a question. Brad Douglas, the workshop. Definition question. I noticed that CAS numbers were eliminated in some cases and a move to just using IOPAC nomenclature. Was curious whether that was done for some purpose or it's just a move that was made to maybe mirror DEA work.
I don't recall the exact how we landed there. I mean, the IOPAC nomenclature is helpful in that it gives, it specifically identifies what we're talking about. I mean, the CAS registry numbers are similar, but they can also refer to mixtures. I think we've at least seen some cases where CAS numbers have caused some confusion, partly maybe through typos, but if you have feedback one way or the other, we're absolutely open to it.
Yeah, my preference is to use both. I think IOPAC is certainly specific, but it doesn't hold much meaning to most people. Even to a chemist, IOPAC is clunky, where CAS numbers are generally found to be like a social security number for a chemical compound, something that can be put into a search engine and you can bring up the picture of that molecule. So my preference is to use both, and that can help clear up some of the ambiguity in using either one.
All right. So the next big section here is 845-025-1310. This is page 14. It's the section on licensee prohibitions, OLCC licensee prohibitions related to artificially derived cannabinoids. So basically no manufacturing artificially derived cannabinoids, which includes using reactive materials in color remediation columns. And it provides a sell down period for licensees to sell through their existing inventory of products that contain artificially derived cannabinoids. This draft puts it at April 1, so 3 months after these rules would take effect. But just taking that as a starting place for discussion, any feedback, whether on the general concept of the rule or on specifics on what a sell down period should look like for products that are currently in the market.
Eric Went, Greenleaf Lab. I was thinking on this and that by and large, the vast majority of items that we see at the laboratory for these products, like these, like artificially derived or whatever those ones fall into, are infused into edible goods, I guess, right, or orally consumed products, whatever that looks like, and they're at concentrations similar to or relatively close to other THC concentrations in the edible product. So you just see a lot of like 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 or 1-to-2 formulations, or 1-to-1-to-1, where it's THC, CBD, CBN, and they're all low concentration of these isolate materials that originally went through compliance testing according to the Oregon rule, and then are being formulated at low dose into orally consumed products. Now, I guess that's not like every single thing on the market, but I bet it's 95%. So I guess I'm just kind of like, the Delta-8 stuff is I think a separate issue because there are certainly a lot of challenges associated with that, but like, are we curbing low-level CBN and CBG formulations in edible goods? Is that like what we're doing with this rule?
I mean, yes, as drafted, to the extent that CBG or CBN are created through synthetic chemistry, rather than just isolated from plant material, that is what this draft would do.
Yeah, JT from Sublime here again. Sorry. But as I brought up earlier at the beginning, the example of Wild, who has a very robust product line out there with CBG, and I believe they have CBN SKUs or mixtures thereof. And as Eric is pointing out, they're likely down in the amounts or not too much higher than you would get in the naturally occurring form in the plant. And I would suggest strongly to the agency, before this sell down date, if it's just for now, we've got to take those off the market until we can get those ingredients through. If we decide to go with some kind of purity check and control study, that you should likely give them the courtesy to tell you how much in inventory they have, how much is in the market. There's such a big thing. And if their sell-through rate doesn't match that, you could be penalizing them many, many tens of thousands of dollars through no fault of their own, with no evidence that anybody has had a public health issue because of these in the amounts in their edibles. So I would strongly, strongly suggest that you reach out to some of these companies that are going to be affected, like we did last year, to go to the labs and say, can you do certain analysis, all these kinds of things. I mean, a little bit different. In the vape space, like last year, those sell through real fast generally. People can make them move. I haven't heard of anybody that got damaged because of where we set the sell-through date with a 3-month run. Oh, some of these guys, I can hear them in my head going, I didn't even have a seat at the table and I didn't know. And then all of a sudden I've got 3 months and yet I've got, 20,000 units and they only sell through at 8,000 a month. Now I'm on the hook, and how fair is that? So that's my recommendation. Thanks.
This is Kim London, Oregon Cannabis Association. I just want to back up what JT just said, and thanks for bringing that up. I think this issue, especially with the expanded scope now, we're going to have a lot of licensees that just weren't expecting to have to get rid of these products. And so I've backed that up any way we can help facilitate or do some kind of financial analysis for businesses. I mean, the other option is just to ask for an much longer sell-through period, which would be great too. Let's do 6 or 9 months. But if we have the time, let's throw it out to our edible manufacturers and find out, because this could be a big hit for them, and let's do what we can to help them get their inventory down.
Stephen Crowley, OLCC. Yeah, thanks, Kim. And part of the process with the Rule Advisory Committee is getting fiscal impact statements. So the extent that you can get feedback from OCA members on that, that would be tremendously helpful and help us on targeting a sell-through date.
This is Jason Lampman with State 3. It's saying a licensee may not manufacture any artificially derived cannabinoids. Maybe, I know there's only 4 research licenses, or at least last time I checked, but possibly you want to leave, since there hasn't, I guess by reading the FDA warning, there hasn't been any bad effects or anybody harmed from what they had said. And 75% of the problems that they have been in unlicensed states. Possibly we want to leave open the ability for the research or someone to be able to do the research to figure out what is good or bad about these.
Travis Ruthenberg, SC Labs. I was wondering if we could discuss specifically columns in use. I know the regulations talk about bleaching clay, and color remediation columns was mentioned. I don't have a lot of expertise with these. Are these columns producing? Are they reactive? Are they producing these artificially derived cannabinoids? Or in some cases, like specifically in the case of bleaching clay, is this just an adsorbent that's removing things?
Stephen Crowley, OLCC. So, I mean, looking at the certificates of analysis for for products that come through some of these types of processes, yes, they result in several percent Delta-8-THC, several percent Delta-10-THC. It's my understanding that this is kind of part of what led to the Delta-8 entering the market when it did, was the processors who were trying to make a clearer and clearer extract found that the Delta-9 THC in their extracts was dropping incredibly with some of their processes, and it was being isomerized. So an acidified bleaching clay, that is a reagent that some people use to manufacture Delta-8 THC. When it's just in a column, it's not converting it to the same degree of completeness that other processes would, but it does result in the material coming out of the bottom of that column having unknown components, the same sorts of unknown components, presumably, as the Delta-8 THC products.
Thanks for that clarification. And for other types of columns that might be designed for cleanup, how does the industry determine which of those are acceptable and which are not?
Steve Crowley, OLCC, that is a good question and something that we're open to feedback on.
JP from Sublime here, just real quick. You guys at the agency should be ready for a big hue and cry and some screaming and ranting and raving, because a lot of the primary phase extract manufacturers are now using the CRC columns. And the way I'm reading this is, because by their nature they will do these things, they are now forbidden. And you're going to have to enforce that and police that. And a lot of those guys, it's created at least organoleptically quality in their products that has made a big difference in their marketing out in the field. So just a word of caution there. I mean, I'm not saying that we should allow them, because as many of you and I have talked, like Steve and Anthony and so forth, I have some concerns about the problems with these CRC columns. And reading of this to me says, we're going to start testing for D8, whether it's going to be on the labels or not. And my sense from OHA is that's going to help OSCC be able to spot red flags that we need to go out and look at what's going on in these operations, look at their SOPs and their processing techniques, and get ready for a temper tantrum.
Travis Ruthenberg, SC Labs, sort of stepping back to the intent of these rules maybe not being to prohibit artificially derived cannabinoids, but the intent of these being to protect consumer safety from the unknowns associated with artificially derived cannabinoids. What would you say to the idea that these types of color remediation columns have been in widespread use in the industry without noted adverse effects as a mark of their potential safety? And I'm not speaking to their safety, but I know that we're talking about these rules in a way of trying to protect consumer safety with a lot of unknowns out there about what might be harmful.
Brad Douglas, the workshop. In most cases, chromatography it fits the definition of a chemical extraction process. You're not having any chemical alteration to the compounds. Having bleaching clay in a chromatography column is a bit more of a red herring. It's not really chromatography, it's something else. I think the intent here is to permit chromatography just as long as there's no chemical alteration. And if that's the case, you might consider having a bleaching clay prohibition be something separate, and even explicitly stating that chromatography that doesn't result in a chemical change is permitted. Because it is, as JT mentioned, it is in widespread use. It isn't creating any new compounds, it's just purifying compounds when it's actually chromatography.
Thanks, Brad.
Nick, I see you've been trying to get a word in here. Anthony Delta-8-THC for the record.
Thanks, Anthony. Nick Pullman, Washington LCB. Yeah, I will share that bleaching clay can be used as a substrate, but I've also seen it in production just be mixed in as if it were an ingredient to a reaction vessel. And I think that potentially we're getting a little off on chromatography, is that essentially any of these substrates could be mixed into quote unquote a reaction vessel to achieve a similar result. A common substrate for chromatography is C18. You could easily get a C18 salt essentially to mix into your reaction vessel that wouldn't change the outcome of whatever was in there, wouldn't chemically alter anything. So, you know, I would just caution that anything that can be in chromatography can also not be. And that bleaching clay was definitely used to chemically convert things, but not everything in chromatography is doing that.
Thanks, Nick. And yeah, that is the intent here, is just the reactive materials like acidified bleaching clay. Chromatography as a purification method is not something we're concerned about. In general, it really is just the reactive processes where people are increasing the number of unknowns and are not entirely sure what's being generated by the processes. That's kind of the theme of where the concern is.
Courtney Moran, OIHFA. I want to go back to Eric and Kim's comments. You know, we fully agree, Delta-8 and these tetrahydrocannabinols that are intoxicating are a completely separate issue than the minor cannabinoids, like we discussed earlier when we originally went over this artificially derived cannabinoid definition, and what Kim said about, you know, the broader impact that this is going to have with folks not expecting this definition to bring in these products that are out on the market, and that they're not going to be expecting that they're going to have to pull these off the shelves. And so I'm just reiterating our concerns. We object to a proposed outright ban of all quote unquote artificially derived cannabinoids as this definition is currently drafted. And hopefully this definition will be cleaned up and clarified and have some more specificity on intoxicating cannabinoids to address the Delta-8 issue and those products that cannot, you know, have the absence of impurities.
Thanks, Courtney. And yeah, if you have specific language, we can certainly consider it. I think we do have some limitations in terms of it is a definition in statute, you know, from House Bill 3000. So I think there's probably room to clarify, but not to change the meaning.
Eric Wang with Greenleaf. I just want to go back to that. So the intent is to specifically identify intoxicating and not others, or is it a blanket ban on all non-extracted from plant cannabinoid products?
Stephen Crowley, OLCC, right. It's not related to intoxicating. That's where the adult use cannabinoid definition comes in terms of what's appropriate for sale to adults versus sale to minors. The artificially derived cannabinoid definition in the bill has no reference to intoxicating potential. It really is about the method of production, and if things are being made by chemical reactions. So CBG extracted from CBG flower absolutely falls within the realm of things that are allowed. That's just a concentrate or extract, depending on how you make it. CBG that's made by a chemical process from CBD or some other starting material. That's where we get into the territory of artificially derived cannabinoids.
And once again, how, we need to think about how we're going to determine that, right? Somebody can say, hey, this came from the plant. By looking at that molecule, we're not going to know if it came from a plant or if it was synthetically derived. And I think that's another, that's an issue we're going to run into and have to figure out how to regulate that.
So I guess
your name for the record. Thank you.
Sorry, Kim Stuck, LA Consulting.
And Steve Crowley, OLCC, just I guess a clarifying question is that something that currently the consumers, I mean, do you think consumers ought to be able to be aware of that? And is there any uniformity on how a consumer might determine whether the product that they're buying on the shelf that just says hemp derived, is there any way to know currently whether that consumer has any idea of whether this is just something extracted from hemp versus something manufactured synthetically, or I guess from your perspective, is that even an issue?
JT from Sublime here. Seeing there's no comment to the question, and please answer it if there was the desire to. But I think a CBN is a very good example. It's naturally occurring. Generally, as again, I'll refer to the email that Brad sent around this morning. There is a carve out for using oxygen, and we know that to get the right purities and volumes of CBN, which is now a prevalent addition for sleep aids. And it uses an oxidant, but is not oxygen per se. I would think you'd want to consider broadening that up, because there's probably, again, with the oxidants that are used, no reaction products and all that stuff. It's just a simple oxidative process. And why I say this is, now let's think about the consumer, because part of this is about the consumer's public health, access to good product. And so let's say that you've got thousands of people in Oregon who are now off pharmaceutical sleep aids, who are using a wild gummy that's got CBN, that in this case now is going to be banned, but it was just done through this oxidative process, not specifically with oxygen. And so I'm all for protecting and knowing that, we might get these minor impurities that could be hurtful. We don't know. But by the same time, now you're penalizing a whole bunch of people who have found a safe alternative to certain pharmaceuticals. And it's hinging on how we at this table really nuance this stuff out and put the guardrails around it. I could see it again having a clear damaging effect for consumers in the name of protecting them from what we don't know is even a problem yet. And therefore, that's why this conversation around purity, using control studies or whatever mechanism to be able to vet some of these things out and then allow them into the marketplace, for the consumers, for their benefit. Because I think that's part of what we have to look about is consumer benefit and consumer safety at the same time. So, thanks.
Thanks, JT.
This is Joe Bergen with Avitas. I'm neither a lawyer or a chemist in this instance, so I'll speak more from an operator's perspective and then also from a consumer's perspective as well. I think JT makes some really good points that we have a consumer base that really wants to consume minor cannabinoids, both CBN and CBG, and we need to make sure that those products are available safely. But I really think we're conflating two different issues here. One issue is the conversion between either Delta, hemp to D8 or Delta-8 to Delta-9, which we haven't discussed much, but I'd say is our primary concern as a licensee is protecting synthetic THC that comes into the marketplace. And then secondarily, cannabinoids that may not be intoxicating, in my opinion, should be treated slightly differently than those that are. So I'd recommend that you segment those two things out in the rules and treat them separately.
Thanks for reading this up. I just was like the origin of this kind of whole zone, did it all start with the prevalence of D8 and XO and whatever they're calling D10 or THCO acetate? Like, was that the original catalyst for all this new additional language?
Yeah, I think that was what kind of got the ball rolling on the legislature passing House Bill 3000 was both there were several different hemp-related pieces that went into that bill, but Delta-8 was one of them. High Delta-9 hemp edible products was another. Issues with production and potentially illicit cannabis, in the hemp market was another. There were a lot of different related issues that kind of all tied into the same bill.
Yeah, they're going with Phoenix. I mean, that seems logical to me. Like, I agree that's been an issue, and it's something that, even as a laboratory operator, like, I wish I didn't have to deal with it to a degree, because there's just a lot of the D8 and kind of those other super similar THC cannabinoid products. It becomes really challenging to measure them independently in the presence of each other. But the other minors that are naturally occurring that are, easy to identify and very, there's not a challenge to separating them from any sort of THC component. That to me hasn't been an issue at all, where the D8 and D9 kind of mixtures and things certainly have been challenging and stressful, but not these other minors in regards to not only just measuring their purity, but to accurately measuring them in the presence of other cannabinoids. The technical difficulties with testing these products are not the same as the technical difficulties associated with D8 and the other similar compounds.
I'll offer one additional comment here, Brad Douglas, the workshop, and this riffs a bit off of what JT was mentioning, that the concern that chemistry can cause byproducts or unknown constituents that are potentially hazardous is not misplaced. I think what's key, though, is to have at least a process outlined to evaluate should a process be sufficient to meet safety considerations, or at least a promise to come out with that process. Maybe a promise that there's going to be a guidance document in the future. And I think that's key. I think if you don't allow for that in regulation, then it just becomes a blanket prohibition, and it's very, very difficult to change that in the future.
This is Joe Bergen. Just one more comment from Avitas. Just one more comment from the consumer lens here. You might consider that consuming these minor cannabinoids orally might not be as dangerous as inhaling them. So you might consider that there might be different applications and different regulations for the different consumption methods.
Thanks, Joe. All right, the next several changes here, I think we can kind of lump them all together. Producer privileges and prohibitions. There are a number of changes here related to implementing other bills or concepts. The one piece that's relevant for artificially derived cannabinoids is just the very last section there, 2B. That a producer may not transfer, sell, transport, purchase, possess, accept, return, or receive any marijuana or hemp item containing artificially derived cannabinoids, except as allowed under 845-025-1310. That being the rule that we were just talking about that prohibits manufacturing them and provides the sell down period. That same language appears in 2800, the retailer privileges, 3215, the processor privileges, 3500, which is the wholesaler privileges, as well as being in 2755, hemp handler transfer privileges, just clarifying that a hemp handler also can't transport hemp items that contain artificially derived cannabinoids to OLCC licensees. And 2760, the potency limits for hemp items within the OLCC license system, just has an added bit of language that a hemp item cannot contain any artificially derived cannabinoids. So those changes cover a lot of pages, but they're basically the same change in several places, and really just an extension of the rule that we have just been discussing. With that, I'll pause and open it back up for comments and discussion.
And just real quick, so you don't have to hear from me anymore, just state your name before you add a comment. Thank you.
Courtney Moran, OIHFA. I'll just reiterate my same concerns and comments again for sections 2755 and 2760. We would like this to be more specifically targeted to intoxicating cannabinoids and not the blanket prohibition, as we've discussed numerous times already today. Thanks.
Dylan Summers, on behalf of Bonnie Jo Peterson, I'd like to second that.
Eric Wayne, Greenleaf Lab. I was just looking at the table 1, and the only one that's a bit of the one that poses a bit of a challenge is the final one, which is hemp cannabinoid products other than tinctures and topicals, with the maximum concentration or amount of Delta-8-THC being 10 milligram per container, or 1%. The 10 milligram per container gets a bit challenging when the container size is pretty large. And I might issue a COA to someone who uses hemp isolate, and I list the LOQ on the report as 0.001, but if their unit weight is 1,000 grams or 100 grams, well, I guess it'd be 1,000 grams in that scenario, but like you can as the unit weight gets bigger, the necessity for like a very, very low LOQ to show that there's nothing in there becomes like at some point you're like chasing zero. So I don't necessarily know what the answer is, but like that, depending on the particular product, you may run into some issues with having a test result that shows 0.0000 something in order to ensure that there's not more than 10 milligrams in the whole container.
Thanks, Eric. Steve Crowley, OLCC. So just to clarify that, that's putting it in table form is new here, but the rule itself is already in place, and it's consistent with. I mean, there are jurisdictions where, even marijuana beverages are limited to 10 milligrams in the beverage, which is one of the higher weight items. And I think Canada limits at least some types of cannabis products to 10 milligrams in a unit. So I guess concern noted, but and that is something that we'll be able to talk about a bit more next week as we look at these kinds of limits for the general market hemp products also.
Courtney Moran, OIHFA. So if we're moving on to the table here, my members object to the current proposal for the table. And so we have sent over to this group an email with our recommended maximum concentration limits as laid out in this table, which I'm happy to go over with all of you. And, the limits that we're proposing are half of what is currently allowed in adult use products in the regulated market. And so before I get into specific products, one thing my members wanted to point out was that it appears that this table is specifically in regards to products, but it's not about ingredients that would be going into other products. And so I don't know if there's going to be a third column or there's going to be another table for ingredients, or if that's a separate rule. But my members want to make sure that there is clarification on limits, for example, for bulk ingredients of concentrates and extracts that would be going into further processing and then into products, by a licensee. One of my members specifically said if they look at the extract limit of 5%, that's fine, but the 50 milligrams is not fine. If they had a 2 kilograms of crude oil, which was testing between 2 to 3% THC with 50 to 60% CBD for further processing, that would max out the 50 milligrams. And so they want to make sure that these milligram limits are not going to apply to bulk ingredients. And so we want to protect, and going into, what Stephen just said about the general market, but we want to protect bulk transportation of kilos of these materials, not only between Oregon hemp handlers and secondary manufacturers, but also for the sale of these bulk ingredients into OLCC for further refining and then for use in the production of end products. And so it's not in this table, like I said, but we want to make sure that there is some clarification on that allowance. And we do recommend that with those allowances that there would be specific regulations that these bulk ingredients, they could not be sold directly to a consumer. It would only be to other licensees, whether it's an OLC licensee or a hemp licensee for further processing or incorporation into an end product that would meet, obviously, the product concentration limits. And just ensuring that licensees remain able to purchase these crude extracts in, bulk quantities for the purpose of being an ingredient in another product.
JT from Sublime Solutions here. I would totally support that, both in this industry and in the larger nutraceutical industry. I've been involved with bulk wholesale ingredients, and I think again, it's a line that should be heavily considered. Because it is true. I could get something that's not for sale, but by the time I make that final product, it's going to meet spec. And I don't think we should take that right away from the hemp side of the industry.
Thanks, JT and Courtney. Steve Crowley, OLCC. So again, just to clarify, these are already existing limits in rule. We're not looking at any major changes to them at this point. And yeah, so the key word in here is container, which is defined to mean the ultimate sale to consumer package. So yes, the limits don't apply. The per package or per container limits don't apply to bulk ingredients. So yes, a hemp handler with an OLCC certificate can transfer a hemp extract that has 4 to 5% THC to an OLCC licensee. It's just the finished product that is limited to the 50 milligrams for a concentrate or extract, and that's basically to line up with if you have a 5% THC hemp extract and you package that in like a 1 gram vape cartridge, 50 milligrams is what you would have as the allowable amount of THC there.
Courtney Moran, OHFA, thanks for that clarification, Stephen. That's helpful. So we don't have to go over the specifics now, but I mean, my members would like to see an increase of those per container limits. What I've seen in the rules previously is the percentages, but not these per container limits. And so we're proposing in the email that we sent you with our updated and proposed changes is an increase of those limits. And also that this table does not provide for hemp edibles or hemp topicals. And we know that my members have told me that hemp topicals are some of the biggest things that they're selling. And a lot of those products that have the most efficacy and, best results coming from their consumers, they're really at like 4% THC. And so we would like OLCC to be looking at that into the table that we proposed.
Thanks, Courtney. All right, moving on in the rules, so I think we're through the Division 25 changes. Division 26 has the same adult use cannabis item definition, or it has a clarification in here just to make clear that adult use cannabis items, it doesn't involve hemp grain and fiber products, non-cannabinoid hemp products. That's more related to the general bill and technical updates. Artificially derived cannabinoid, the definition that is currently in place here that was put in through the emergency rulemaking when House Bill 3000 passed was just a straight copy paste of House Bill 3000's definition. This includes some clarification, and it's the same definition that we discussed above with the pros and cons that we've already talked about. If there is anything more to add, we can certainly look at that. But if it's the same comments that we've already discussed, we can take those as applying in this section as well.
Even real quick, what page are we on?
Oh, sorry. We are on page 30. And then The rest of the definitions here, there's lots and lots of added definitions. Those are pretty much all for implementing other bills and concepts, particularly the OLCC is taking over the potency, serving size, and concentration limits that are currently in OHA's rules. And then the industrial hemp-derived vapor item, the hemp vape rules to implement Senate Bill 96. So then I think the next significant part that touches on artificially derived cannabinoids is in 845, 026, 0210, and 0220. These are very similar to the concentration and serving size limits for adult use and medical marijuana items that are currently in place in OHA's rules. A few adjustments that we'll call out and discuss at the advisory committee meeting next week that's talking about this one. But for artificially derived cannabinoids, that's section 2 on each of these rules. A retail adult use marijuana item cannot contain any artificially derived cannabinoids, and for medical marijuana item cannot contain any artificially derived cannabinoids.
Courtney Moran, OHFA. I have a couple questions from my members on some of these new definitions. Stephen, we saw that there are new definitions for intended for human consumption and then intended for human use, and we were just wondering what the intention is, just so there's clarification for creating these new definitions.
Off the top of my head, I believe those definitions are borrowed from our labeling rules in Division 25, because we do have labeling rules to implement for the hemp vape items. So I believe that's the purpose of getting those definitions in there is for implementing Senate Bill 96.
Okay, and then again, Courtney Moran, OHFA. The next question for the definition is on the definition of hemp tincture, which it refers to 4 fluid ounces or less. And we realize, like, you're not saying you have to make a package that's 4 ounces. But if somebody were to, that the currently proposed milligram limits would not work. And that's, again, why we are proposing different milligram and concentration limits in the document that we had sent you versus the proposed limits within these rules. Because my members were explaining to me their formulations and how this would calculate out into, you know, if they're currently making a 1 ounce bottle, to if they had increased to a 4 ounce bottle, and that if they did so, they would have to change their formulations and change their ratios to meet this new milligram limit if they were able to scale up their package size, which is what a lot of them are explaining to me that they're trying to do. They're trying to, you know, increase the volume of the packages that are going out to reduce cost to consumers. But if they're going to be tied to these new milligram limits, they're going to have to completely reformulate their products. And so, you know, we ask that you take a very close look at our proposed milligram and concentration limits, and you know, we definitely welcome you to have further conversations with us about these proposals and why we're putting those proposals forward.
Thanks.
So maybe there's.
We will definitely look at those. I have not had a chance to review them in detail yet.
That's fine. And then Courtney Moran, OHFA. One more question for clarification. The definition for usable hemp refers to flowers and leaves of hemp intended for human consumption, not falling within hemp concentrate or extract, edible cannabinoid product. It includes pre-rolled hemp as long as the pre-roll consists of only dried leaves, flowers, unflavored rolling paper, and a filter tip. So my members wanted to ask, does this include infused pre-rolls, and meaning pre-rolls that are not just whole flower but may have hash or CBG or something else within them? And then, you can answer that question. I'll give you my second question.
Steve Crowley, OLCC. No, that is a copy paste of some language from ODA's definition of usable hemp, and no, an infused pre-roll is, you know, would be a hemp cannabinoid product, not I mean, usable hemp is flower by itself, or just with a rolling paper and filter or crutch, as ODA's definition says.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Courtney Moran, OHFA. Second question about usable hemp. Would this include freeze-dried flower or freeze-dried raw material?
That is a good question. I'd have to look a little closer and potentially talk to ODA about how they interpret those definitions, because our definitions are here really are just following what Department of Ag has established.
Okay, thank you very much.
JT from Sublime here, just a quick question. Courtney and her group are suggesting what look like maximum concentrations of Delta-8-THC. If you're at 1 or 3%, doesn't that violate the federal hemp rules? And so therefore, I mean, I understand why you would want to do that. That makes sense to me. But I'm just wondering if that then makes these products in violation of the actual federal rules.
And this is Tyler Bechtel with the State Police. I just want to piggyback onto what JT's saying, and isn't that in direct conflict with our criminal statute?
Stephen Crowley, OLCC. So the 1%, 5% limits that we discussed were hemp items that are being transferred into the OLCC regulated market for sale at OLCC licensed marijuana retailers. The statute does include an allowance for items at a marijuana retailer to have more than 0.3% THC. And then for the in-process products, there was some language in House Bill 3000 that allows for transportation of material that's above 0.3% between Department of Agriculture hemp licensees, as well as from those ODA licensees to OLCC licensees. But yeah, not for interstate commerce, not for sale on the general market. Those are places where that 0.3 cap is firmly in place, to my understanding.
JT, with a follow-up question. So Stephen, would that mean that this is, if Courtney's suggestions were taken, so a 1% tincture, it can come into the OLCC market and be made and so forth, but could it still be labeled as just an industrial hemp product, or because of the federal statute, it would have to be labeled as an actual adult use cannabis product?
Steve Crowley, OLCC. So under the current rules, which allow for, say, a hemp extract vape cartridge to have 50 milligrams of THC, that does exceed the 0.3% limit. But as long as it is entirely hemp derived, that is still a hemp product in terms of the labeling and in terms of not being subject to the tax on marijuana. That's the current framework that we're living under. I haven't had a chance to review Courtney's proposal in detail, so I don't want to comment on that hypothetical.
Eric Wayne, Greenleaf Lab. I just want to clarify the concentration limits there, where the table 3 industrial hemp product concentration certain limits on page 38. It's for the 0.3% using one significant figure. Does that mean that like 0.4 is failing, but 0.34 is passing? Like, is there guidance on any of that? If the COA says that there's 0.32%, is that meeting the limit, or what does that look like?
That is a great question, and yeah, any feedback on how people think that should go, you know, we're open to.
The team from Sublime here, knowing some friends in other states that are doing hemp, from my understanding is that state by state, it's a little, it can vary. Some states are saying, you know, 3.49 is really the top, and I believe it's Tennessee that's allowing up to just under 4%, as Eric is suggesting. It's kind of like, where's the rounding that's going to be involved in this?
Eric with Greenleaf. Just for reference, the current ODA rule is equal to or greater than 0.35 is failing for pre-harvest hemp, which is, you know, not exactly what this is, but that's just where the rule is. And that, I'm sure Sunny will comment that that's going to change with the adoption of USDA regulatory language, but that's where it sits now.
I just got a JT from Sublime here. I just got a quick clarification question on table 1 for the adult use cannabis concentration and serving size limits. I seem to want to remember that for the concentrates and extracts, it looks like that it's being suggested that get doubled to 2,000. I was just curious, and a number of people I've talked to are curious as to the logic behind that increase.
You know, I am not certain on that. That's one of the sections that's on the table for next week with the bill and technical. I know we did hear some feedback about wanting to be able to reduce packaging waste and packaging costs by having somewhat larger units of sale. I believe that's the reasoning behind the increase there.
JT from Sublime, yeah, that was our speculation, and I'm all for it. Packaging waste and the waste stream is just ridiculous, unfortunately, with our industry. I would like to suggest, and I'm not sure that people would do it, but if you're going to do that for other forms of concentrates and extracts, that it might be fair that you know, vapable type products also be allowed, and it's absolutely based on the same argument. How many carts, you know, how much extra packaging, and the carts generally hold a stability for a reasonable amount of time. And if manufacturers were willing and could put 1.5 grams or 2 grams in, if the actual focus of that change is packaging waste issues, which as I said, I fully agree with, I would like it considered. Like I said, I'm not sure anybody would do it because of logistical problems and so forth, but fair is fair.
This is TJ with OLCC. So Courtney mentioned sharing concentration limit proposal with this group. I missed if the specifics were read into the record, but one of them being hemp-derived edibles being up to 100 milligrams, which is what the recreational marijuana limit will become under Senate Bill 408. So Kim London, apologies in advance for putting you on the spot, but you're sort of the closest there is to a representative for marijuana edible production. Could I ask your thoughts on hemp-derived edibles and marijuana-derived edibles having the same concentration limit?
If Courtney Moreno-Ochebe, if I can just specify that the serving limits for hemp are half of what the recreational limits are. We're not proposing to have the same serving size limits.
Kim London, Oregon Cannabis Association, put it on the spot here. Yeah, I think we're fine. We would prefer for the increase there. That's my not uneducated, but kind of on the spot answer there. We don't see any problems in limiting that.
Got a question. Brad Douglas, the workshop. In the definition of adult use cannabis item 026-03000 or 300, it contains 0.5 milligrams or more of any combination of these THCs, tetrahydrocannabinols, THC acids, D9, D8. But then in table 3 for your hemp items, all these maximum concentrations or amounts seem to be above that amount. So I'm curious if those are meant to be mutually exclusive or there's some other rationale.
Yeah, Steve Crowley, OLCC. So the 0.5 limit is for the cutoff for sales to minors. If something is going to be sold to somebody under 21 years of age, it needs to be able to be demonstrated that it has less than that 0.5 milligram of THC in it, where the numbers in table 3 are for hemp products for sale to adults on the general market outside of the OLCC license system, but still to adult purchasers.
I see. Thank you.
All right, and that has brought us to the end of the draft language here. I guess just one more call if anybody has any comments, feedback. Now is the time.
JT from Sublime, and I mentioned this as a concern from a number of people that I've discussed the issues with. And, no pressure, Anthony, if you can't speak to it right now for whatever reasons. But do we have yet at least a general idea of what changes in the labeling requirements might be happening around, Delta-8 concentrations and stuff like that?
JT, Anthony Delta-8-THC for the record, given the way the rules are currently drafted, I don't even have draft language for that because as it stands, it would be prohibited. So there is ergo no need for that language at this time. But it is definitely something I've got in the back pocket. It's something I've kind of noodled on with ideas and concepts.
Got that. Okay, because thank you. This is JT from Sublime, because now I can, on the other side of me, I can let people know that at this point, it seems like OHA is going to require it. It's not going to be required on the labels, and that it's a functional tool for the agencies to be able to track this ingredient or these types of artificial cannabinoids in the system and be able to get a read on them for traceability and so forth. Does that sound right?
Yeah, Anthony Delta-8-THC, yes, JT.
Dylan Summers here. On behalf of Bonnie Jo Peterson, I just have a technical question, clarification question. When in the definition of artificially derived cannabinoid, I'm looking at 4A. When chemical substance ... derived from the plant cannabis family Cannabisaceae. Is that just a clarification that it's the cannabis of the family Cannabisaceae, or is the intent there to include things such as hops and hackberry?
Steve Crowley, OLCC. Now, my understanding of the phrase "the plant cannabis family Cannabisaceae" is to refer to the entire genus of cannabis, but not to other members of the Cannabisaceae family.
Travis Ruthenberg, SC Labs. I wonder if folks have given consideration to what a pathway might look like in the future for the production of artificially derived cannabinoids, just like Delta-8. Is that, I know the big question here is unknowns. I wonder, is that something that would look like a process that's been thoroughly evaluated and, allowing a particular process? I think from the laboratory perspective, saying that anything is, completely free from any potentially harmful chemicals is, not something you can ever be certain about. So I wonder, if there's any sort of pathway for an approach that does allow Delta-8 and some of these other compounds, where potentially those are being allowed in other states and Oregon's missing out.
Steve Crowley, OLCC, yes, I mean, like I said at the top, it's something we're absolutely open to. That was really the direction that we were trying to get some feedback on and explore initially. At this point, it doesn't seem like the data is there yet. Like the industry has gone through the sorts of steps to even know what to test for in terms of byproducts, to make sure that the materials that they're selling to people to ingest are known and reasonably, have some reasonable confidence of safety. So yes, that's something I think we continue to be open to the extent that data becomes available.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're pretty confident that the data is not available and that you want something investigated, but you don't know what that is. We don't know what that is yet. Is that fair?
I mean, Steve Crowley, OLCC, I think a starting place would be to take the reaction mixture, make sure that you're getting a consistent product, and then identify each of the byproducts or components of that mixture. I mean, it's similar to what's done in a, like JT alluded to, in a pharmaceutical control study sort of context, so that you have a known product.
Great, thank you.
This is
sorry, Travis Ruthenberg.
Sergeant Tyler Bechtel with the State Police. I'd just like to echo some of the comments earlier were focusing on, what's known to be safe as far as cannabinoids are concerned, and really, shifting focus to what are those unknowns and what are those things that we just don't know how they would affect a person. And I would caution, if we are looking at synthetic cannabinoids and how those are going to be regulated, I would caution against looking at specific methods of producing them, because in my experience with clandestine labs, we're always finding a new and novel way to produce something that we've never heard of or never seen before. And I think you would stifle industry in a way if you start with the process, starting at the end result and confirming that there's nothing unknown in there. It seems like a much more logical way to approach that. Just a comment.
And JT from Sublime here, I would agree with that statement, and I think it seems to me that's where a lot of the comment here is being focused, is, because if you do it in that final product and look at the potential impurities and adulterants or degradation products, if the process can clean it up, then who really cares what the process is? I mean, not outside of fire safety and chemical safety and stuff like that, which is normal. And I want to just re-emphasize a comment that was made earlier in some of the language. No licensee has the ability to manufacture them, not to have them on site and sell them, but I think via the research certificate program. And I'm going to tell you, if a research certificate is what it takes to be able to, in my in-house lab, and I don't mean my production facility, I'm not necessarily on scale, that I would have the ability to manufacture small lots and be able to not only help my own business, but help the agency understand what might be there. And if I'm willing to take that cost, I think it should be allowed. And of course, it would be bounded with none of it can ever be sold. It's got to stay in-house. But I could go to labs and they could test it for me. And so this is the carve out that is going to allow Oregon's industry not to be left behind in the face of 2 to 3 years or whatever from now. It's going to go national. And if other folks have been allowed to do this, then Oregon's economy is really not going to get what it could out of it, and the businesses here are going to suffer. So I really think that was a really good idea, whoever brought it up, thank you, that maybe slightly change that and allow for a research certificate to do this kind of work in-house. So thanks for bringing that up, Tyler. That's important. And whoever did the earlier comment.
Anthony Geltoski. Does anybody else have any comments they'd like to add? If not, I'm going to move on to the fiscal impact portion.
I'd like to make just one more comment. Dylan Summers on behalf of Bonnie Jo Peterson. Just for the record, I'd like to throw our support behind the proposed changes provided by Courtney to Table 3 of the industrial hemp product concentration and serving size limits, mainly because it's most representative of the extracts and products thereof of a simple, extraction of hemp, of compliant hemp at the federal and state level, and their cannabinoid concentrations, and just wanted to throw my support behind it.
The first thing I'd say is I think you did a great job defining Delta-9-THC and Delta-8 in your rules. You might consider just adding a couple more cannabinoids in there. We've talked a lot about CBN. I think those definitions would just be helpful. And the other thing I would say is your definition is defining, let's say Delta-8 is the minus trans isomer of Delta-8. And I'm fairly confident that all of the synthetic Delta-8 is a racemic mixture. So there's also the plus trans isomer. There's fairly good research to say that plus trans isomer is not psychotropic or very lightly psychotropic, even compared to the minus trans isomer. So I would consider that, exogenous or not an intended outcome, which is nearly 50% of your product. So I think that is just something to keep in mind is even in these synthetic processes, artificial processes, we're not even sure about half of the things we're intentionally making.
Going once, going twice. Anybody else? All right, Anthony Geltoski for the record. At this time, we're going to move on to the fiscal impact statement and public health safety questionnaire. I will collect feedback from the group regarding the possible fiscal impacts of this package. For those wishing to provide additional feedback, please complete the statement and return it to us within the week by emailing it to olcc.rulemaking@oregon.gov. We also have committee members representing our public health and safety partners participating in today's meeting. For our partners, please feel free to utilize this time to complete the health and safety questionnaire. Does anyone have any immediate fiscal impacts of these rules they would like to bring to our attention right now? Not hearing, and just to emphasize, you can absolutely send fiscal impact statements to olcc.rulemaking. This does not preclude you by not offering comments right now. On behalf of the OLCC, I want to thank our panelists today for providing their expertise on these issues. A notice of public hearing will be issued in the coming weeks, which will allow for interested parties to provide testimony or submit written comments. For more information, please visit our website or email olcc.rulemaking@oregon.gov. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.